We haven't yet really come to terms with the ways in which Christian identity is now going backwards. When we're thinking about the future of the church and where it's going, I say, I come from the future. Because the Australian church, I think of all of those, perhaps the New Zealand church as well, is in some ways further along that path of dealing with what it's going to be to exist in the realm of a much more secular society than the one in the United States. Britain, the Church of England and the United States are different from one another, but they have in common a sort of patrimony of religious affiliation and cultural deference towards religion, which is going to take longer to diffuse, but it's still going to diffuse, so I'm confident of that. I found myself as a schoolboy even scratching my head about the fact that how come I was the only person in my class who went to church? And so the process of secularization, I think, in Australia and New Zealand, and to some extent also in Europe, including the UK, I think is more advanced than in the United States. 30 years ago, I came to this country and was really struck by how lively and full churches seem to be, how my identity as an ordained person seemed to be something to which people were deferential in daily life. And it was really like coming to another world. It was a world that was still religious. And across that time, I think the United States has sort of hit a couple of hurdles or walls of secularization. I mean, for me, one of them was the 9/11 experience, and the COVID experience will probably have proven to be another one as well, where change doesn't always happen by sort of slow, easy development, but sometimes by quantum steps, as it were, where people start to ask themselves difficult questions about what about this religiosity that we've been assuming is a part of the social fabric of our lives? Is this really going to persist? Of the movement for liturgical change in the 20th century were in some respects fueled by recognition at the end of the First World War in Europe that maybe the gig was up. You know, that in England you see people coming back from the trenches after the First World War and the horror that had been experienced there, and quite a number of quite significant Anglican theologians of the period realizing that Christendom had in effect broken, that the experiences that so many of the people they had, you know, shared cigarettes with in the trenches and so forth had broken the sort of the remaining facade of a sense that, you know, the church and or the nobility, aristocracy, you know, sort of things people can see going on if they watch Downton Abbey, for instance. You can see that world starting to come apart at the seams. And while that particular TV series didn't deal so much with the religious dimension, that was very much a part of the experience of the Church of England during the 20s and 30s. I think that one of the reasons that we began revising our liturgies in the 20th century was because of a recognition earlier in the 20th century that the game had changed and that the church needed liturgies not for an established reality in which religiosity and church-going was simply a part of the fabric of everybody's lives, but for a world in which Christian identity would start to become something which was unusual again. Now that process of recognition was, I think, interrupted by the Second War and by the baby boomer generation and the fact that everybody in the 1950s seemed to want to do everything. You know, there was a swing back towards association with religion, not so much, I think, because of a profound growth in religious understanding and belief, but because there was this upsurge of the need to connect and to create social bonds among people. But I think that kind of insulated the Episcopal Church because the secular is now basically shaking us by the shoulders and saying, hey, you know it's over, don't you? And yet I find that many clergy and many laity haven't really got to the point of thinking that that's something that they need to deal with or have to accept. I'm not quite sure of the right way to frame that because it's not easy news. But the writing has been on the wall for 100 years. It's just that we've had these interim periods when it seemed that things were going sufficiently well that we could just sort of hold them at arm's length. How are we going to think about what authentic Christian discipleship means in a world that probably doesn't care that much anymore? I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Hey fam, it's Paulie. If you liked that video, want to join the conversation, be part of this community, click the subscribe button so you don't miss a thing uncommon good. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.